I had an idea to make rubber guns for my grandkids. This is a basic single-shot rubber gun made like my father made for us in the 50s when I was a boy. And it's the same gun he made when he was a boy in the 20s, 90 years ago. It shoots big rubber bands cut from rubber inner tubes. The gun is 24 inches long and made from scrap 2x4. You can make two guns like this from a piece about 27 inches long. The gun has an interesting release mechanism, basically a trigger and a pawl. When the rubber band is stretched back from the muzzle and secured here against the pawl, the trigger holds it in position. When the trigger is released or pulled back, it permits the pawl to rotate forward and release the rubber band, like this. It's completely harmless, shoots about 20 feet. Although family lore has a story about my grandfather, somebody shooting my grandfather's pipe out of his mouth when he stuck his head out from behind a tree one time. You start the project with a piece of scrap 2x4. This used to be a leg on a sawhorse. Here's another one after I ran it through the planer, bringing it down to 7/8 of an inch thick. Of course, if you run scrap lumber through a planer, be careful it has no nails. Probably should sand off any paint like this too. You'll need a pattern. This pattern follows the shape of a .22 single-shot rifle in half scale. You'll notice it has the marks on here for the mortise that you will cut through the stock of the rifle. It also has the pins, the holes pins that go through and secure the trigger and pawl in position. This mortise is about 2 inches wide, 2 inches long, and is located just forward of the hand grip here. You take the pattern, of course, and you simply trace the shape on your stock. Let the barrel, you should let the barrel run long so you can trim it later according to how long your rubber bands are. Try also not to have any knots in this small thin section of the barrel. If you want to make two guns, which you can on this piece of 2x4, simply reverse the pattern and trace another one. The next step in the project cuts the mortise and the gun. I'm using a mortising attachment on my drill press, but you could probably use a drill and a rasp freehand. It'd be a lot more work. Now, if you use a mortising attachment, cut the mortise at this stage in the process before you cut the gun to shape. Here you have a 2x4 with square surfaces that you can stabilize and secure in the drill press. If you cut the gun to shape first, you'll have a difficult time securing it in proper position under the drill press. Now on this 7/8 inch stock, I'm using a 3/8 inch mortise, centered, leaving about 1/4 of an inch of stock on both sides. It'll cut about 2 inches deep enough to get through the whole gun. And now you can see that I've cut both mortises, one on each side of the stock. And now it's time just to cut the shape out on the bandsaw. Probably should have a 1/4 inch wide bandsaw blade on here, but I'm too lazy to change it now. These are the two gun stocks, rough cut on the bandsaw. There's no need for precision here. I'll be sanding them to final shape later. You can see how the cut exposed the bottom of the mortise, like this. The next step sands the gun stock and rounds over the edges on the router table. You can sand this probably on several different kinds of tools. This is a stand-up belt sander that's very convenient. It's also quite dangerous, and so you need to be very careful because it wants to draw you in. It also permits you to sand concave curves, for example on the bottom of the stock here, like this. You could also do this with the drum sander. You can see how rough this is, and the sander of course will take this out. This is you can see perhaps the pitting on this tool from when it was flooded during Hurricane Katrina. Here's the gun stocks after the rough sanding and after the edges have been rounded over using a 1/4 inch roundover bit on the router table. I also took a chisel and a file to clean up the inside of the mortises here. Now comes the artistic part of the project. I say artistic because you'll need to spend some time designing and shaping the trigger and the pawl mechanism here that go like this. These are made again out of soft pine. It's cut from 3/4 inch stock like this. The trigger is about 1.75 inch and 7/8 long by 3/8 of an inch width. The pawl is about 2 inches, 1.7 long by 3/4 of an inch tall. You can see the relative position of the hole in the pawl and the trigger. Now the way this works is that you'll make a pin to go through these holes. Probably the best thing to use is a 4-penny finishing nails. I didn't have any, so I'm going to make them out of this pop rivet, push through a 5/64 hole that I'll drill with this. Here's the gun stock. I've marked the locations for the pin holes. Here's the stock. Here's the pattern, and I put it over the stock and clamp it in position, and then just drill these holes through and through the mortise here. And once I do that, here you can see where I've marked the hole in the pawl, and I'm going to drill as straight a hole as I can. In the pawl and in the trigger. Okay. And now I'm ready to fit the pawl and the trigger with the pins in the mortise and do the final fitting to make sure that they work together properly between the two of them. Now it's time to fit the pawl and trigger in a trial assembly. The way I do this is with a flashlight, and then I stick the stock over the edge of the table so that I can see the hole through I can see the light through the hole. I put the pawl in position until I can see the hole, like that, and I put a small pin through the two of them just to line them up as well as I can, like that. And you can see how this now rotates freely. After you're finished, you might want to take a chisel and cut out here and cut out here to give the pawl a little additional swing. Once I have the pin, this trial pin in position, I'll remove it, and here's the real pin, pop rivet. Cut that off, and I'm going to run it through the soft wood like this without moving the pawl. Bingo. And again, you can see how it works. The finished product will have the pin cut off on both sides, or at least one side, so that it's recessed on both sides so that the sharp edges of the steel don't catch anybody. Now we'll do the same thing with the trigger. Clean out your hole first. Put it, let's see if I could get this in proper position. There we go. There it is. Yeah. See, like that. Bingo. Actually, this fits very, very well just on the trial assembly. You can see what I mean when I say you try to get it so that it's pretty secure. So it's not real, it's not loose, it's tight against the bottom of the pawl. Now when you pull the trigger, bingo, the pawl swings forward like that. So we'll do the same thing again with the pin. Like that. And now you have the basic makings of a functional rubber gun. When you pull that trigger, the pawl swings, releases the pawl swings forward, and the rubber goes. Now I assembled the second gun the same way, but this time it didn't work out as well as the other one. And what happens is what frequently happens, and that is the pawl, the trigger is too long. I don't know if you could see that well down in there, but the trigger, the top of the trigger is too tall and it won't go beneath the pawl. So there's two things to be done here. The first is to take your chisel, like I was saying before, and carve out at the bottom here to give the pawl some additional swing, make it higher on this, and to make it's lower on this end so it's higher on this end. And the other thing you can do if that doesn't work is take the pin out and just cut the top of shave, sand the top of the trigger until a very little bit at a time, until it fits beneath the pawl when the pawl is in the backwards position. And that works with some effort. Okay, you're in the home stretch now. The only thing left to do is to make some rubber bands for the gun. This is a truck inner tube I got some time ago from AutoZone, as I remember. I don't know if you could see this, but it shows the size. It says 7 or 7.5 with a 15 or a 16-inch radius. You take a straight edge, and what you're going to do is just cut a band directly from the inner tube. You'll make it about 1/4 of an inch here and maybe 3/8 of an inch here to follow the curve of the inner tube. When you load the rubber gun, you always start with the pawl in the back and then the trigger forward. Pawl to the rear and trigger forward. You could cut a notch in the beginning or in the front of the rubber gun to hold the band in position. You just put the band in the front, stretch it to the rear, and secure it behind the pawl, and you're ready to go. That's it. That's all it takes to make a rubber gun. You could sand it up and give it to the kids, and they'll have a good time with it. I know I had a good time making it. Good luck to you.